I've begun the arduous but exciting process of starting my nonprofit. I'm now running into this pressing question: how do I stay in control of my vision while meeting the legal and ethical standards of board governance and 501c3 compliance? I have 2 board members, one of which is not local, but both bring a ton of experience to the mission. In Florida, I'll need a minimum of 3 board members. I was planning to be the president while the other 2 acted as secretary and treasurer. Will it still be legally and morally okay for me to also basically be the only boots on the ground person who's handling reaching out to donors, setting up program locations, organizing my own travel to these locations, and everything else I will be doing before I can bring other staff on board? How do other solo I Have a Dream folks like me get a nonprofit up and running, stay in legal compliance while maintaining the vision of my mission? Thank you so much for everything you do.
There's several layers to this and questions, so I don't even know exactly where to start. But so I'll start with some of the easier ones. You're definitely you're not alone. Startup, I have a dream, folks. That's kind of a cute way of putting it. Definitely wrestle with kind of this balance of, gosh, we got to do all things, right? We're small, we're tiny, we're just getting our start. And so what does that look like? Everything you're saying is completely normal and legal for a startup nonprofit as far as, needing to have kind of multiple hats until you can actually bring on paid staff. So that is not a problem, right? You can wear those multiple hats in the beginning. And I think the key thing you have to try, if you can, to separate, because you're going to be a working board for a while until you have paid staff. But as a working board, you have to realize the distinction between governance and operations. And so I've been on those kinds of boards before, right? And so we've had to intentionally be like, here is the governance part of our work. Here's the oversight, and we're overseeing ourselves, which is kind of weird, right? And what we're doing day to day. So it's almost like it's almost like an out of body experience. Like you're having dual personalities because you got to kind of bring the governance hat to the boardroom. Okay. Let's zoom out a bit and look at all of these, look at the reports, look at our finances, look at this stuff. And, because you're tiny, there's not a ton of that at the beginning, but you're also having to just realize that's a different role than when you're wearing your volunteer hat to be an unpaid staff member. You're in the weeds, you're operational, you're implementing, trying to move the mission forward day to day. And so those are 2 different roles. So I think that's the first thing, and making sure your board members understand that, because board members get confused. I think it's the hardest board to be a part of is the startup board at this stage, because you really have to be nuanced about, do we have are we looking at this from a governance perspective, or are we getting the operational weeds? And the reality is most people defer to the operational weeds because it's right. It's just more natural, to think about that. Would you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I guess, in my mind, I feel like there's a few things. You got to keep those roles clear and separate and distinct. And, you can create whatever your board meeting agenda, or you can do things like that to help. I feel like, you talk about, leveraging board members' expertise. Could you bring on even other board members, just so you can start to build that kind of machine of people that have expertise you need, but also can help you with governance side. I think making sure that, you can find kind of explore partnership options. I hear a lot of what you're saying about compliance. And so I think, are there ways that you can either outsource, or you have the budget, or can you look at maybe a fiscal sponsor relationship where your organization gets basically purchases services from another entity? And there's a lot that exists out there. So you want to do your due diligence, but basically say, we want you to handle all of the things to keep us straight, like filing of paperwork, handling, all of the things we have to do annually, making sure that checklist, because there's people who are there's firms and companies as well as organizations. Sometimes Sometimes United Ways, sometimes community foundations offer that kind of service. There's a lot of options out there. And so like you could just see how you can have a partner in that on the front end. Now I realize that takes money. So that's the hard part, right? Like that stuff isn't going to come cheap, but it's sometimes the best way until you get your legs under you. And you can also learn from that fiscal spunk. Like you can see what they're doing. So you kind of learn about that. And, you know, like there's also that, I think so many times you see startup founders or people who are like, hey, I'm running as fast as I can, but they're actually not investing in their own education. And there's so many resources out there. Andy, you and I know them, right? The National Association of Nonprofits. That is a great website to go to that has like some of these elementary, like has articles, has resources, has webinars. There's things like Candid has a bunch of things for a startup nonprofit, like putting yourself through even kind of like that online education so you kind of know what you don't know. Is I just think that's something that sometimes people miss because they're so busy trying to get the work done, and then they realize, right, a few years later they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know we were supposed to be doing that, right? Or something comes to bite them in the butt and they're like, shoot, I wish I would have done that. So I don't know. I'll stop talking for a minute and let Andy chime in, because those are just some of my initial thoughts, even though I have not answered the one of your larger questions about how do you control or maintain control of your vision. I hear a lot of that in your question too, which is probably something to unpack a bit. But Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't. I got nothing to argue with that. So it's the National Council of Nonprofits.
Oh, that's it.
So,
that's it.
Right. So
yeah,
they do have a ton of resources. Candid has a ton of resources. So one of the things I'd say is like, don't forget that when you've decided to do this, you decided to start a business. You didn't decide to just do nice things for the community. You decided to start a business. And so you kind of owe it to your vision to sit down and think really hard about how do I make this business function, like completely separate from how do I deliver program services and what's the structure of my board look like. You got to think about like, how am I going to make money? Where are the donors that are going to fund this? How does the cash come in order to keep the cash flow going so that this can continue longer than 15 minutes? And I see a lot of baby nonprofits, people come in with a great idea, but then they're so focused on the fun part that they completely miss that what they did was start a business. So there's plenty of resources to help you figure that out. We've talked to SCORE before. SCORE is another good one. We'll put in the show notes, we'll put a link to SCORE, and you can find your own local chapter of SCORE where you can be partnered up with sort of a local business leader who understands how all that works, who can talk you through all of the other things you need to think about on the business side to make sure that this thing functions. I'd be careful overextending yourself too early by just only thinking about the mission side and the vision side and not thinking about the finance side. I think that's a good way to burn yourself out really quick and put a bunch of money on your credit cards and get a really bad taste in your mouth.
I would also add there's you mentioned being in Florida. So there's a Florida Association of Nonprofits. So that National Council of Nonprofits that Andy mentioned is sort of a master resource, but there's also local associations across the country in different states and communities. So check out what Florida Association of Nonprofits offers. That's another resource for you specifically since you're in that area. I have found, and we'll put all these links in the show notes, I've also found Board Source. I can't remember, whatever, $100 for an annual membership, and it provides you a ton of access to like everything from startup boards to more sophisticated boards. So a few of those like investments I think are going to really pay dividends. But I also just think, I want to go back to your question because I feel like there's also this sense of, I don't know if you've heard it of us talk about it, or you've heard other stories, right, about someone's vision getting turned around, and you talk about wanting to stay control in your vision. And I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that unlike a business where a for-profit business where you create your own for-profit business and can keep the vision and have full control of your vision, you do not have that ability when you are a nonprofit, right? Like, because you have a board directors that basically makes decisions around these kinds of things. And there's more voices than you at the table. And so I don't say this to scare you, but I say it to just realize it's a different model. And it's a model that's more of a, I don't know, a democratic model of having multiple voices and having multiple, so there's not one person kind of controlling it all. And so that's part of the power of nonprofits and the way they work. So just be aware of that. But also, I mean, certainly keep it front and center, put it on, start every meeting talking about your vision. Remind people of your vision. Make sure that your vision is informed by what's going on in your community. Like, are you getting is this just, your wild-haired idea, or have you been able to get feedback from others to find out what their needs are and how that vision supports that? So I think those are all really important steps too. But again, just realize that ultimately you'll never have full control of maintaining that vision. You certainly can help influence it. You certainly can help keep it top of mind and remind people, but just a little caveat.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to sort of reiterate why that's the law, like why that's the rule. So when you're applying for your 501c3, so what you're doing is you're asking the federal government if it's okay if you take money from people and give them a tax deduction on the money that they give you, if they are eligible for a tax deduction because of what you're doing. And the other side of that is that any revenue that you make, less expenses, isn't, if it's part of related to your mission, that's not going to be taxed. So there's two pieces to that. So you're giving somebody else a tax benefit and you're getting a tax benefit yourself. So the federal government is giving you these two benefits, and in exchange, it's asking for something. What it's asking for is a bucket load of compliance and rules about how you operate. And it's asking that the purpose of this can't just to be benefit just a single person. It can't even benefit a single group of people. It needs to benefit basically the United States of America. That's what the purpose of your organization needs to be able to benefit a broad-based community. And it's been that way since 1945 when the original laws were passed. So this is really expansive. It gives you plenty of opportunity to do really neat things, but because you're not paying taxes and because you're giving people tax breaks, the rules that you need to comply with is that it's not going to benefit a single person and that you have to have a board that consists of more than just one or two people. So in Florida, they've set it at 3. Some states have less than that. Some states have more than that. And the reason is because they want to have a little bit of diversity of opinion so that what you're doing is going to broadly benefit the community, not just you and a small group of people. Now, saying that 3 people is enough to do that is a little bit silly. Like, that's obviously, you can, if you handpick those other 2 people, like, you could do whatever you want. It reminds me a little bit of like in for-profits, like you'll have somebody that comes up with like a business idea and they don't want to share the business idea with anybody because they think if they say it out loud that everybody's going to steal it. And the reality is that ideas are a dime a dozen, just like nonprofit missions are a dime a dozen. Everybody's got, you can just walk down the street and like grab the first person you see and say, hey, do you have a good idea for the nonprofit? And they'll be like, oh yeah, you know what you should do, right? And they'll tell you. So where the benefit comes in and where you're going to be able to do it is in the execution. So it's not about like the smartest idea. It's about the smartest execution of that idea. And that's business work. That's boring business plan, making lists of potential donors and figuring out how you're going to contact them and why they're interested in this interesting thing that you're doing. So you're I don't want to poke holes in anybody's bubbles, but your idea, your vision isn't important. Your vision is something that you're going to use to change the community, and it's up to you to convince more than 3 people that that's a good idea. And if you're going to be super singular about it and be very concerned that somebody's going to like tweak your vision, this isn't the job for you. You need to find another thing to do.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacy Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my super amazing co-host Stacy Wedding, who I know you're all jealous because I get to spend time just chatting with Stacy, so that's okay.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I'm just laughing out loud about that. No, Stacy, who stumbles over her words and, joins the podcast recording 10 minutes late because she packs her schedule too much. Yeah. Anyway, no, thank you though, Andy.
I'm happy that I get to slide into that packed schedule someplace. I think that makes me feel special. So the way this works is you send us questions, you meaning the people listening right now or the people not listening. And we do our best to answer them. And if we can't, we'll bring in a guest expert. So you can send us questions go to the Nonprofit Everything show notes page, which is nonprofiteverything.com. There's a button there you can click. You can also just email questions at nonprofiteverything.com. That gets to us as well. And we do our best. And with that, we'll jump right in.
I love it if you would share your thoughts on fractional CFOs. Are there certain size organizations or stages of development where something like this makes more sense? What do you see as the benefits as well as the downsides of bringing on a fractional CFO?
I think it depends. The whole thing kind of depends on what services you expect from a CFO, like what you think this person's going to do for you. So in a larger organization, like the CFO usually oversees a team of people, including the finance team, sometimes HR, sometimes IT, is kind of responsible for dealing with contracts and managing contracts, and then is the main conduit of information from that world, legal and finance, so the conduit from the organization up to the board. Because the CEO a lot of times is more interested in either the operations side of it or the fundraising side of it, and finance is like, we're just going to let somebody else figure that out. Like so the CFO kind of becomes the catch-all for all the rest of the stuff. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for somebody that's going to synthesize everything together, and you think that somebody can do that in 10 hours a week, like then maybe it might be a good fit for you. On the other hand, some people, CFO is like, it sounds fancy. And I know there's a company out there that's all they do is they provide CFO. You can see Stacy can see my air quotes, but I'm going to have to try to use italics in my voice. CFO services that they'll sell to you to nonprofits, and they do nonprofits exclusively. But when you kind of dig into what they're doing, it's bookkeeping. So they're just doing like regular bookkeeping, financial statements, making sure checks get paid. And depending on the size of your organization, that might only take 10 hours a week. Like if you're not really cutting that many checks and you're not doing a whole lot of POs and you've got a relatively streamlined, straightforward accounting process, like that could be 10 hours. Like that doesn't necessarily have to be an entire 40-hour week. But that's bookkeeping services. That's not, for me, in Andy's world, CFO is synthesizer of lots of business related information that doesn't live in the program side or in the fundraising side, right? So you've got when you do your functional expense statement, right? You have to do it for the 990, you have to do it for audit, and you have to break all your expenses into program, fundraising, and management in general. So the CFO is like in charge of management in general. Like that's their pocket of stuff that they need to deal with. So figuring out what you need and then thinking about how many hours a week is that really going to take, and is somebody that's not embedded with us who understand, who is having conversations with for me as a CFO, one of my primary focuses as CFO is figuring out what the development team needs. like being able to have a direct line of communication between the finance side and the development side so that they're speaking with one voice. Because a lot of times in many, many organizations, that's a very common source of friction, is the development team just wants to go raise money and the finance team is like, yeah, but you can't because the rules say, FASB, GAAP, blah, 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 right? And they get mad at each other because they're speaking two different languages, even though they ultimately should be working toward the same purpose. So for me, most of that work is making sure the development team has what they need and that you're making their job as easy as possible by saying, what you could do is if you package these things together, you could call it this and that would be fine with us. Would that work for you? Like coming up with solutions to solving development problems from a finance perspective, or thinking hard about like, how is cash flow actually going to work? Because, as I've said infinity times on the podcast, like liquidity and cash flow is the primary problem with most nonprofits, and all the financial statement stuff is just extra nonsense you have to do because it's a rule. So like making sure that everybody understands they're comfortable with the budget process, they're comfortable with how the money's flowing through the system, they're comfortable with the speed at which the money moves through the system. Like all those things is the CFO's role. So you have to decide, and back to the question, is that something somebody can do in 10 hours a week? Or do you need somebody dedicated to just that job? For baby nonprofits, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like can somebody really have that big picture view in 10 hours? Or are you just looking for a bookkeeper so you don't have to worry about it? Like if that's the case, then, you might not even need a CFO. You need an accounting firm or a bookkeeper that like understands nonprofit stuff that can keep that under control for you.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because I think so many times you hear people, because it is fancy or sounds sophisticated, they go, oh, we need a CFO. And I'm like, in my opinion, many organizations, unless they start to get pretty complex with their financing and funding structures and need high level strategy, like to me, CFO just feels like it's more for I don't know what size. I don't know if I have a number to put on it, but the more sophisticated or larger and more sophisticated organizations. And the rest of it is probably more like bookkeeping and controller kind of work, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And some of that's title inflation, right? So it's just, you want to bring somebody on and you're like, well, I mean, it's, in like sort of a perfect math world, there would be like dollar thresholds for different titles. So you can't be the CFO unless you're getting paid more than $150,000 a year, which would like knock out thousands and thousands of nonprofit CFOs because they're not
really
making that much money, right? They would have to be controllers or bookkeepers or some other job because they can't meet the dollar threshold. But the reality is like when you're having that initial conversation with like bringing somebody on and they're like, okay, it's a bookkeeper role, but what if we call you CFO? Is that okay? What if we throw a VP in there? Can you be VP and CFO? How about SVP? Can you be a senior vice president and a CFO, even though the money stays the same? Like, is that title, and what you're doing is you're playing to the ego of the person you're trying to hire to make them think, well, then my next job, I've got like experience as a CFO. So then my next job, I'll get paid even more. Although everybody kind of knows the same thing, right? They look at the size of the organization you worked with and you're like, well, that was a baby organization. How are you the senior vice president when your organization had 4 staff members? Like, what were you the senior vice president of?
Right? Exactly. Well, and I guess the other thing I'm thinking about is I've seen organizations that don't have much, if any, financial expertise in-house. And so they either need to, that's a big barrier, right? Like you gotta have somebody who can do that. So something like that, again, depending on size, might work to augment that. But here's a question for you. Like how do you as a leader, like I still feel like, let's say I'm an executive director of a small nonprofit and I want to outsource whatever we're going to call it, bookkeeping, controller work, whatever. Like I'm going to outsource that. But I still have to be able to know what I'm looking at. Like it doesn't keep me off the hook, right? From like knowing if this is accurate, helping be a support to that outsourced firm. And so what I think I've seen and people run into pitfalls is when they just outsource this and they're like, hands are like, it's like they wipe their hands of it, like, not my thing to worry about. And yet it is still your thing to worry about because you're overseeing the organization. So how do those kinds of, because I think there's a lot that exist, executive directors that don't have that baseline skill set. How would you advise them to work to either gain that knowledge or work with that firm so that they aren't just trusting this external firm and not really knowing really what's going on? I mean, like, how do you deal with that?
I'd say that, so the good news is that accounting, because it's so codified, because there's FASB and there's GAAP and there's very specific rules, unless you just hire, oh, my uncle has QuickBooks installed, he'll do it, right? Unless you've got you've picked somebody who just is a dilettante and thinks that because it's a computer program, they can do it. And you're finding somebody who actually has the skills. I mean, it's just like anything else. If you're looking for a bookkeeper, for a nonprofit bookkeeper, the first question I would ask is how many other people do you do nonprofit bookkeeping for, right? If the answer is none, then you're like, okay, I'm going to make a couple more calls, right? And there are lots of ways to do that. If you just pick your community, download a bunch of 990s and see who the audit firms are for all those 990s, who signed all those 990s. Because a lot of times it's going to be some accounting firm that works in town that's got a lot of experience with 990s. You can call them and either they'll be like, yeah, we have in-house bookkeepers that do it, or more likely they're going to be like, yeah, you're way too small for us. Our fees would kill you. So here's some bookkeepers that we work with or we've seen that seem to have their act together and haven't caused us problems during audits. And they're, most, if they're not friendly, call the next one, right? Find somebody that's going to help you find a bookkeeper that understands what nonprofits need. It's weird because in the, in nonprofit sector, when you think about who you're hiring, once you got the founder in place, the founder immediately, the second person they hire is either going to be programs or it's going to be development. Yeah. That's always what do I need next? This program's development. And then you kind of grow from there. For-profit companies, a founder comes up with an idea, the first person they hire is a finance person. Right. They want a CFO because what's most important to them on the for-profit side is cash money. What's most important to the nonprofit side is doing our mission and making sure that we can get enough revenue to do it. And so getting that, it feels like it's a rule. It's it's taxes. You don't do it for fun. You do it because you have to do it. Yeah. So you bring on a bookkeeper because it's a requirement, not because it's something that's actually going to benefit you. I'm clearly biased. I think a good finance person is actually super helpful, and you need that voice in the room, somebody that can say, well, there's 9 ways to do that, and you've picked the stupidest one, so let's do one of the others, right? You need somebody that's able to say, here's, in my experience, here's all of the ways that you can do this thing. Let's figure out a cost-benefit analysis and see which one makes the most financial sense. You kind of want somebody that can do that. That may not be a bookkeeper. In a lot of boards, that falls sort of on the treasurer. The treasurer starts answering those questions, which, it's not ideal, but if that's all you got, that's all you got.
It still, though, goes to the fact of, at the end of the day, there is an ultimate overseer. I think the message I just hope people think about is that there still needs to be the ultimate overseer of it. And I don't know how, if you don't know as much as somebody else, you don't know if the numbers you're getting are off. So I think that's the, am I making sense? That's the part that feels tricky, right?
Yeah. And I think still, if you find a reputable bookkeeper, right, because accounting is so straightforward, they're the whole point of accounting is that there's just, these are the rules and you have to follow the rules. There's some wiggle room in the rules, but the wiggle room is almost always about taxes, not about how do you actually do the work. I think if I find a reputable bookkeeper, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Okay.
I've in my entire career, I have not come across, and maybe I'm just lucky, but I haven't come across any bookkeepers that were incompetent. I've come across a couple of CFOs that took a job title that they didn't need, right? That are just glorified bookkeepers, or, and no shade on bookkeepers either, because that's a hard job. You need a certain personality to be able to do that well. Yeah. Right. And a CFO is a different personality. That's somebody who's got to be able to have conversations with the board audit committee and talk to auditors. And, you gotta be able to have conversations with humans, not just with spreadsheets, if you're going to do the job well. But in bigger organizations, the audit is what tell you. Like the auditor is the one that's going to come in and go, this bookkeeping is a nightmare. Like this, and you don't want to find that out later, but that's the check. But I've never really seen like bookkeepers go sideways. I've seen people that are confused or make it harder than it's supposed to be, or, put weird arcane rules on things, but it's usually the other way. It's usually like, why are you making this so complicated? Like, you don't have to do that. Like, just let's figure out the simpler way to do this rather than that really complicated way you did it. But nobody's like incompetent the other way where they're just like, throwing it all in a bucket and stashing all the money in the mattress or whatever.
The other thing that strikes me that maybe is helpful if you go, it's if you don't have the luxury of it in-house, or like sometimes you see someone there's a strong finance, maybe skill set in-house, but what they're not as strong at is how they package and share the story of that information for those who are not finance people. And that strikes me as, I don't know if you would call that a CFO level, but something where like reporting, dashboards, charts, graphs, like that kind of thing is what so many boards love and gravitate toward, or want a narrative, like a written narrative along with, like for those who aren't the numbers people, but a written narrative that shares the finance story along with whatever the spreadsheets. Like there is a gift in having someone, whether that's internal or external, to share that story for those who don't have and that may be the CEO or executive director, and that may be the board of directors, right? So I feel like that is an asset, and I think every organization should figure out how to get that. I don't know about you, Andy, but it makes it so much easier for those people who are like, I'm not a finance person, I don't know what I'm looking at, but like make it easy for them to understand it.
For sure. Some of the companies that do like fractional CFO services, that's one of the things they provide is they put together the finance portion of the board packet in such a way that it's understandable for your typical board member, and not just like a giant stack of papers that happen to be financial statements. Because as I've said it a bunch of times, like the standard set of financial statements that we give to a board are effectively worthless. Like they're there for a reason, and it needs to be done that way, but that's the base level. And you don't want to just, it's like, I don't know, I'm having trouble thinking of an analogy, but it's like just doing enough to get a C in class. Like that's C level. And if you can't do that, you get a D or an F, but A and B work is what you want from your CFO for sure.
Yeah. Hey there, listeners, whether you are new as a listener or loyal, we so appreciate that you joined us for today's episode of Nonprofit Everything. You came, you listened, and you learned. Hopefully you learned. And that is what our goal is with all of this. Andy and I have intentionally, as we have been doing this for the last 5 to 6 years, intentionally said, you know what, we're not going to do paid ads that everyone skips past anyway. We're not going to go get sponsors. We are doing this just because we want to do it. And we hope to impart a few things we've learned along the way, bring others in to share and to hear what's on your mind. So thank you for listening. Thank you for always sending us questions, because we couldn't do this without you. And with that, we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.